Hello and welcome to StudyIQ. In this lecture, we will discuss about the distress in the edible oil sector. Why this has become an important current affair is because the import of the edible oil has increased. First reason is the import of edible oil has increased in its value as well as in volume. So, value means the amount that is involved in the import and the volume of the import. So, both has increased. So, if we look at the statistics, after crude oil and gold, edible oil is the third largest commodity that we are importing. So, edible oil has become the third largest commodity, and when it comes to the case of food commodities, edible oil is the highest food commodity that has been imported. So, with regard to the food commodities, edible oil is the highest imported food commodity, and after crude oil and gold, edible oil has become the highest importing commodity. Before we move on to the current affair, there is an irony associated with this. Let us first understand what is the irony. Then it will be easy for you to understand the issue and also to come up with solutions. So let us see what is the irony. Usually in an economy, when will the imports increase? So when the aggregate demand in the economy is more than the aggregate supply, this will lead to shortage of commodities. So we know this is a very basic concept. We have already discussed this concept in demand and supply. When demand, in simple terms, when demand increases more than the supply, there will be shortage. So this shortage has to be filled. If in the domestic market there is lack of commodities, or if there is a shortage of commodities, what will happen? We will import commodities from other countries or from outside the economy. So this is the normal procedure. So when the aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, this will lead to shortage of commodities. And if this shortage cannot be filled by the products that are available in the domestic market, we will depend on imports. In this case, the domestic producers or the domestic growers will reap more profit because there is a shortage of commodities in the market, and if they have products with them, they can sell it in the market because the demand is high, and when demand increases, we have seen that price of the commodities will increase. This is known as demand pull inflation. When the aggregate demand in the economy increases, the price of the commodities in the market will increase, leading to demand pull inflation. So considering this concept, the domestic producers should gain more profit because of an increased aggregate demand in the economy. But the irony here is that the domestic producers, in our case, that is with regard to edible oil, the domestic producers or growers of the edible oil are in distress. Usually in a scenario where the aggregate demand in the economy is more, the domestic producers must be able to gain more profit. But here in this example, or if we take the case of edible oil, the domestic producers, or we can say that the growers of edible oil are in distress. And this distress is very huge or very large. We can say that they are not even able to get a price that is equal to the minimum support price. So they are not even getting a minimum support price or value equivalent to the MSP. So we can understand how deep is the distress with regard to the growers of edible oil. Now coming to the reasons for this distress. One reason is that the area under cultivation has been stagnated. What will happen if the area under cultivation is stagnated? Which means that more agricultural land is not dedicated for the cultivation of oil seeds. So area under cultivation has become stagnated. And another reason is low yield. What do you mean by low yield? Low yield means that the produce that we get from the farm or agricultural land is less. So the production or the yield is less. According to the estimates, the yield per hectare is 1000 to 1100 kg per hectare. So the yield is very less. What can be the reasons for low yield? So low yield must be associated with certain reasons, and here the reason is no incentive for farmers to improve the agronomic practices. So the farmers are not provided any incentives. Because the farmers are not provided with any incentives, what has happened? The investment in technology, in irrigation, in fertilizers, etc. has come down. So without incentives, the farmers are demotivated to invest in infrastructure or irrigation, fertilizers, technology, etc. So that is the reason it has resulted in low yield in the agricultural land. Another reason is the marketability of the crop is weak. So when we say that marketability of the crop is less, it means that price support mechanism is weak. Or we can say in this case, the price support mechanism is nearly non-existent, or there is no price support mechanism for the growers of oil seeds. So these are the reasons that has led the growers of the oil seeds into distress. Because of this distress, the government might have done something. So now let us see what is the initiative that the government has already taken. So what did the government do? The government has increased the tariffs for oil or edible oil. Tariffs were increased by the government. And what was the rationale behind increasing the tariffs by the government? One thing, when the tariff increases, the import of oil seeds will come down. So when the import of oil seeds comes down, there will be lack of competition in the market. So when there is lack of competition in the market, the government thought that the domestic growers or manufacturers will gain out of it. The farmers will make profit when the competition comes down. Actually, what has happened, because of excess imports into the market and the importers were able to provide the edible oil at lower prices, the price of the edible oil came down, and this came against the domestic growers. So government thought that with an increase in tariffs, the competition from outside the economy will reduce, and this will help the domestic growers. But in reality, what happened? In reality, we already saw that the aggregate demand was more than the aggregate supply. So the domestic growers were not able to meet the aggregate demand in the economy, which led to shortage. And when there is shortage of commodities in the market, obviously the prices will grow. So the prices of the edible oil increased in the market, and this badly affected the consumers. This led to inflation and badly affected the consumers. And this increased rates of tariff helped only the traders and speculators. So speculators and traders were benefited out of it, and it badly affected the consumers without giving any gain for the growers or the farmers. The increase in the tariff rates helped only the speculators or the traders. So the consumers were also put into distress because there is less imports, or imports were cut down because of increased tariff. This created a shortage of edible oil in the economy. We know that when aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply, there will be shortage of commodities. And if the domestic producers are not able to meet this shortage, definitely it will lead to inflation. So the price of the commodity or the edible oil increased in the market, leading to inflation, and this badly affected the consumers. Again, coming to the growers or the farmers, the increase in tariff did not give them any benefit. So they were also not gained out of it. So what must be the focus of the government? We have seen that the increased tariff has no way helped the farmers as well as the consumers. So what should be the focus of government in this context? This issue needs a very serious policy attention. So the government must make policies with regard to this issue. And how must these policies be? The policies must be able to balance the interest of both the consumers and the farmers. So consumers' interest needs to be considered, and also farmers' interest also needs to be protected. So farmers and consumers, both of them must be given focus, and both their interests must be considered by the government in its policies. So coming to the consumers, what is the interest of the consumers? The consumers, especially the poor consumers, must have access to cooking oil, and also this access must be at affordable rates, which means cooking oil or edible oil must be available to them, and this availability must come at minimum cost. So this is the interest of the consumers. Coming to the farmers must get remunerative prices for the oil seeds. So remunerative prices must be provided to the farmers. So this remunerative prices will help them or incentivize them to produce more. So when they get fair prices for their produce, they will produce more, the yield will increase. So this will help in reducing the imports. In order to protect the consumers as well as the farmers, what can be done? Or let us see some suggestions or way forward for this problem. The first suggestion would be to put a ceiling on import. So ceiling on import. What does ceiling on import mean? Ceiling means putting an upper limit. So When the government puts a seal, it means that the volume or the quantum of the imports cannot go beyond a particular limit. That is ceiling. Why the government must put a ceiling on import? When the import increases, what happens? There will be excess of commodities available in the market. So in the case of edible oil, we have seen that there has been excess import of edible oil into the market. And this excess import will lead to the aggregate supply being more than the aggregate demand. So when aggregate supply, or when we say in simple terms, when the supply is more than the demand, what will happen? The prices will drop. So when the prices drop, it will badly affect the domestic farmers. So the domestic growers will be badly affected due to increased import. So when the government puts a ceiling on the import, the government is actually putting a upper limit. So this will help the farmers to get protection against the import of commodities. Another solution is to monitor imports. We have seen first solution is to seal the imports or put the upper limit. And again, whatever is being imported, this must be properly monitored also. For example, registration of contracts or tracking arrivals, etc. Monitoring imports will improve the transparency. When the transparency of the trade increases, the policy makers will get real-time information, or the information will be more valid or relevant. So real-time information will be provided if the trade is transparent. And with right information, the policy makers can make right policies as well. So transparency in trade is very important, and in order to ensure transparency, there should be a proper mechanism to monitor the imports. Another solution is to reduce the long credit period. What is meant by credit period? Credit period means that importers are getting a period in order to repay to the exporters. So if suppose a person A, he is an importer, which means he is in India and he is importing edible oil from another country. And suppose X is the person who is exporting to A or providing the commodity edible oil to A. And credit period means the period X gives A in order to pay his debt. So what happens when there is a long credit period? The importers will get a long period in order to repay the debt to the exporters. So this will encourage the importers to import more edible oil, or for that matter any commodity. So when the credit period is long, the importers will import more commodity to the market, which will lead to excess of commodities in the market, making the aggregate supply more than the aggregate demand, which will in turn reduce the prices or lead to a drop in the prices, which will affect the domestic growers. So in case of edible oil, the credit period is 90 to 150 days, which means the importers will get at least 90 to 150 days in order to pay the debt to the exporters. So this is a very long credit period, and this will encourage the importers to import more. And when the credit period is less, what will happen? They will have to repay the amount soon. So the amount or the quantum of the imports will come down. Another solution is dynamic tariffs. Dynamic tariff means that the import duties of edible oil must be varied, which means according to the market condition, the import duties must also change. When there is more supply in the market, the import duties must increase in order to cut down the supply. So varied import duties or changing the import duties also will ensure protection to the domestic producers. And with the domestic tariffs, the government should make sure that the price of the edible oil is not cheaper than the MSP. So we have seen in the reasons for the distress that one reason is the domestic growers are getting money or value less than the MSP or minimum support price in case of edible oil. So the government should make sure that the price of the edible oil does not go below the minimum support price. So these four factors or these four solutions we have discussed. This is with regard to the farmers or the growers. So these four solutions will help the farmers to get more marketability, or the marketability of the edible oil will increase, and also this will help in lifting the domestic oil prices. This will help the farmers. And we already said that the priority of the government should be not only to protect the farmers but also the consumers. Now let us see what can be done in order to protect the consumers. The interest of the consumers is to get access to edible oil or cooking oil, and also this access must be at a minimum price or affordable price. So access and affordability is the two factors when it comes to consumers. So what can be done in this regard? First of all, edible oil can be included under the Public Distribution System and the National Food Security Act. So under the Public Distribution System, the government provides commodities to the consumers at an affordable rate under the Public Distribution System. So under the Public Distribution System, the essential commodities are provided by the government at cheaper or subsidized rates. And coming to National Food Security Act, the National Food Security Act aims at bringing food security in the economy. So bringing edible oil under the Public Distribution System or the Food Security Act will ensure food security for the consumers. This will ensure access as well as affordability for the consumers. For instance, if we take an example, 2 kg of refined oil or cooking oil is available to every family every month at subsidized rates. Let's imagine this is going to happen. What will be the result? The food security and the nutritional security of the households in the country will improve. So this can be one thing that can be considered by the government. Again, a combination of the PDS, that is a Public Distribution System, and also private trade supplies, which means the private trade, this can help in protecting the consumer's interest. So government should also have a role in providing edible oil to the consumers. So all these measures can protect the interest of the consumers as well as the growers. But there is a risk associated with it. What is the risk? It is associated with the geopolitics. What is that risk? We live in a complex policy environment. And in this complex environment, there should be a balance between the domestic, socio-economic and political compulsions on the one hand. That is, one hand we have the domestic, socio-economic and political situations, and on the other hand we also have international obligations. So we have signed a number of treaties. We have obligations towards the World Trade Organization. So such things are on the other hand. So we have international obligations as well. So these must be balanced. So we cannot completely give priority to the domestic needs and we cannot completely deny international obligations as well. So the government must try to maintain a balance between these both things. But while maintaining this balance, the preference or the priority of the government should always be to protect the livelihood of growers and advance the interest of the consumers in that economy. So this must be the priority of the government.